Hello, everyone. My name is Lynette, and I am coming to you all from the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California. It is so lovely to be with all of you today. And actually, today is a very special day. It is Shark and Ray Awareness Day, where we want to celebrate sharks and rays, right, these incredible creatures, and learn more about them. So that's exactly what we are going to do. And so today we're going to be talking specifically about rays in this program, but we also have lots of programs, and we did two earlier about sharks and about drawing both of these animals. So today we're going to do a deep dive on rays in particular. I am not alone in my celebration. So my teammate Sarah is behind the camera controlling all of the magical things behind me so that we can see lots of pictures and videos as we learn about rays today. And you all are part of the celebration as well. So if you're watching this live, we would absolutely love to hear from you. And there's a couple different ways that you can participate. So if you would like to text us, our text number is 562-286-1838. And Sarah will be checking that text line. So we would love to hear any questions, comments, or just some ray and shark love if you would like to share with us. You can also email, and our email is live@lbaop.org. We'll also be checking that email inbox, and we would love to hear from you. And those will be up kind of throughout the program so that you can participate if you like. But with that being said, let's get the party started. We're going to learn all about rays today. And actually, we're going to talk about how we will learn about rays. So today we're going to be doing science together. And I say that really intentionally because science is an action. It's a choice, right? It is a way of thinking. And so today we're going to be doing science by making observations, right? That's a really important word in science. What does it mean to observe? Have you heard that before? Well, observing is looking carefully, right? It means noticing. So something as simple as noticing a thing is science, right? Because if you don't notice the things around you, such as sharks and rays, right, you're never going to learn about them or care about them. So let's practice making observations today. In this beautiful habitat that I'm in. This is our shark lagoon here at the Aquarium of the Pacific. I'm going to step off, and I would like you to try to make as many observations as you can. Okay, what do you see? What do you notice? And if you have any questions, you can jot those down, share them out loud, or you can text or email them to us. So let me go ahead and step off, and let's just take a moment to make some observations about our shark lagoon. There actually are some rays in here as well. We'll see if we can spot any of the rays swimming by or maybe in the background. Well, first thing I noticed is there's a lot of activity in this exhibit, right? There is lots of different animals swimming around, and I know that they're different because they look different. Right? They have different body shapes, they have different patterns and colors, and the way that they move is different. All of this is telling me that this specific habitat is home to lots of different and very unique animals. I definitely see some big sharks swimming around. And I'm noticing that those sharks kind of sway side to side using their tail. That looks like the way that they swim. But I'm also going to make some observations about the habitat itself. So obviously this is underwater, but I'm also noticing what looks like some rocky structures. Right? I see what looks like maybe a little rock cave right here. I wonder who lives in there. It's our sea turtle. Maybe we'll see our sea turtle at some point. So there's rocks. There's also some things that look like rocks, but more colorful, right? And I think that might be coral. So all of the things kind of in here, that looks like coral to me. So if I'm seeing an underwater habitat with a lot of coral in it, I'm thinking that this is a coral reef environment. So right away, I'm thinking this water might be warm, a little bit tropical, and it looks really sunny and bright. It really looks like a place that I would love to go on vacation. Okay, I don't see too many rays in kind of this view, but they are in there. They may just be hiding. I'm wondering if we have an image or another video of some rays so we can practice making observations about rays specifically. Ooh, we got one of our zebra sharks coming up real close. All right, so Sarah put up this wonderful picture of a ray, and let's practice making observations of this animal. Well, first thing I noticed is that, you know, it looks very different from a shark, right? And you might be wondering why sharks and rays are celebrated on the same day. Well, that's because they are related to each other, right? They're kind of distant cousins, right? So do you know the thing that sharks and rays have in common? They actually have multiple, so there's lots of different answers. But if you know something that sharks and rays have in common, go ahead and text or email us, right? Or just say it out loud to yourself or maybe to someone next to you. Right? What are things that sharks and rays share? I'll give you a hint. Right? Go ahead and just squeeze your arm or maybe your finger. Right? What are you feeling there? That's a pretty big hint. So inside our body, right, we have hard bones. Okay, our skeleton is made up of bone, right, which is a material. Do you know what the skeleton of a shark and ray is made out of? I wonder. I'm giving you all a hint as well. Right, now go ahead and feel your nose, or you can feel your ear. Feels very different, right, than maybe your finger. Okay, and so your nose and ear is much more flexible. It's not made out of bone, it's made out of a material called cartilage. Right? So the skeleton of sharks and rays both are made out of cartilage. So their bodies are really as flexible as our nose or our ears are. Right? So that's one thing that they have in common. And we'll talk about others as we go along. But in general, they're in that same group of animals that have cartilaginous bodies. So fancy science word for cartilage skeleton. And so here we've got actually a clip of our shark lagoon behind us again. And maybe we'll be able to spot a ray. Let me step off. Oh, I was standing right in front of it. I actually see one right here. And look, it's moving as well. If you thought this was a carpet on the ground, you thought wrong. It is one of our rays, but it does look like a big carpet. I believe that's our reticulate whiptail ray. That's actually the largest fish that we have here at the aquarium. Look at it go, it's swimming. I noticed that it doesn't really leave the seafloor, right? It kind of is just looks like a mat that's traveling along the sand. I'm actually speechless just watching it. And I noticed that it's using its body, the side, and it's kind of with a wave motion traveling almost like it's kind of rippling through the water. That was really cool. Oh, and now I see just the very end of its really long tail. So its tail looks like a stick. And that is where its barb would be, right, or its stinger. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. So that was really cool that we got to see the ray. But actually, on that note, you saw the way that it was moving. The side of its body was kind of making this wave or rippling motion, right? And it can only do that because its skeleton is super flexible, right? It's made out of cartilage, right? And you might be wondering, it looks kind of like a carpet or a rug, right? Or it's got a big ruffly skirt, right? How is that part of its skeleton? Well, this is the cool thing about rays and their anatomy. So let me grab a prop to help me. Right, so here is my kind of model of a ray, right? And so this is the top part of the ray that most of the time you see because the underside would be lying flat on the seafloor, right? And so first off, I noticed that their body is very, very flat. This actually has a fancy word. This is a depressed body shape, right? So flattened along the ground, right? And that is because it spends most of its time laying on the ground. They might even be buried under the sand to help it hide, right? So it's got that flattened body, but if you were to look at it like this, right, these parts that stick out, the part that you saw kind of rippling, right, these are its fins, specifically its pectoral fins. And actually, to help us put this into context, I'm going to bring in another friend. Here is a zebra shark, actually very fitting because there are zebra sharks in Shark Lagoon. Uh, but if we look at our zebra shark, let's see. I've got too many friends in my arms now. These are its pectoral fins right here, these little triangle ones that kind of flap around. And so on a shark, the pectoral fins, you can notice they're like two little tiny triangles and they stick out. On a ray, right, they are much bigger and much flatter. Actually, the cool thing is that on a ray, instead of having pectoral fins that stick out like this, their fins are so big and extended, they connect all the way up to their head, right? So I like to pretend to be a ray by putting my hands on top of my head, fusing them to my head, and I'm going to flap my little wing, my fins, and this is how some rays get around. This is actually pretty good exercise. You're really working the traps. I think that's what they're working. But go ahead and flap your ray fins, right? And that's essentially what you're seeing when you see those big diamond shape or round spots on the side. Also, I've got a lot of questions. Let's see, I want to make sure that you all can hear me. Thanks for giving a lot of feedback. Okay, so someone asked, how do rays use their stinger? That is a great question. And you know what? Actually, I have one to show you. So let's go to my document camera. Let's take a look at the stinger. Okay, I have it in this tiny little vial, but let me go ahead and pull it out. It's quite small, so I'm going to place it here and we're going to zoom in. So if you look carefully, right, this is the barb or the stinger of a ray. And what do you notice when you look carefully at it? Maybe you see what looks like little tiny teeth, right, or tiny serrations, right? And they are facing kind of the opposite direction. So if I were to draw this so we can see it better, the barb looks kind of like this. Almost like a little harpoon. Wow, it looks giant compared to the one that I have. But essentially, these rays, right, they have their barb kind of along that big tail, and they are a defense mechanism. So if a predator, say a large shark, were to swim up behind a ray, maybe looking for a snack, the ray actually has a reflex, right? So it's a very quick reaction to whip its tail up, right, and it would basically poke this barb into its predator. And the really kind of crazy thing is it has all of these little serrations that face this direction. So once it's in, it is very hard to pull out the barb of a stingray, right? Once it kind of gets wedged in there, it would be quite painful to pull it out. And stingrays are venomous, right? So they're not poisonous. So where if you were to say eat one, right, you would not be affected, but they kind of inject a toxin, right? That is what is going to keep that predator away. And that's a great question, right? And they're really cool, right? I know some people can think that stingrays are a little bit scary, but we have to remember that traits that might seem scary are probably for defense. And that's the case for a stingray and its stinger. Okay, we got another question about rays. Is somebody wants to know, what are a ray's favorite food? Great question. Actually, let's look back at that picture of the ray that we have, because first we got to figure out where its mouth is. If we can get a good look at the ray's mouth, I think we can figure out what some of its favorite foods are. All right, so this is a great image. Where do you think the mouth of this ray is? Well, it is actually on the underside of its body, right? So let me stand here so you can see, right? I'm going to point to it. This is the mouth of the ray. So it's on the bottom side, the pale side that would be kind of lying on the ocean floor. So do you think that this ray is going to be eating things that are swimming all around it, maybe swimming above? Or do you think it might be eating things that are on the seafloor? If you have a guess, go ahead and text or email us. We would love to hear. I think that if your mouth is on the bottom, right, that would be pretty good for catching food that is on the ground, right? And that's exactly what most stingrays eat. Actually, they will eat things like crabs, things like different kinds of marine snails, right? Things that you might find walking around on the seafloor. And we can see this by looking at a ray's mouth. So I'm going to head back to my document camera and let's take a moment to make some observations about my ray mouth. All right, so we'll place our barb away and erase that. So here I have a model of a raised jaw. I know it doesn't look like a mouth, but I promise you it is. So this is, what you would see if you were to peek inside the bottom of a ray, and you were to look inside of its mouth. But what do you notice about its jaw? A lot of people say that it looks kind of like um, maybe like snake skin, right? Kind of almost like it has scales. Let me turn it so you can see. So it does have what looks like scales, right? And these kind of flat, these are teeth, right? Are kind of modified to be really smooth and very, very solid, right? So this is a pretty strong jaw, right? But it's completely flat. And then you can see on the other side as well. And essentially the way this would work is I like using my hands as a model, right? So maybe a shark has teeth that can chomp, right, or bite things, right, like this. If you make your hand into two fists and you kind of think about this flat part of your fist that's nice and strong, if you were to grind them together, that's kind of how a raised mouth works, right? So it's really good at crushing things that are hard, right? For example, some kind of mollusk, right? Or really any animal that's in a hard shell, right? So maybe a clam, maybe a snail, or a nice crab. So a ray would be able to crush through the shell and eat the inside. So some of their favorite foods are going to be things with really hard shells. And actually, if you ever come and visit us at the Aquarium of the Pacific and you look in Shark Lagoon, if you pay attention to the bottom of that exhibit, you'll see a lot of crushed up shell fragments from all of the snacks that we feed our giant rays that are hanging out in there. So that's actually a really great question. And we learned a lot about how rays eat. So thanks for asking all those questions. If you have any more, we would love to hear from you. So please continue to text and email us. Okay, so let's see. We've learned a lot about our rays so far. We've learned about how they move. We've learned about what they eat, and a little bit about how they swim, right? But let's talk about some specific adaptations that they might have depending on species, right? And adaptations is just a fancy word for special traits on an animal's body that helps it to survive. So well, let's dive into some specific rays. I mentioned that some of the rays that we have here, they are going to be animals that crush food with hard shells, but there's other rays that eat different foods, right? So let's see if we can show a video of maybe a ray that is going to be more of a filter feeder, something that is going to be, collecting little floating things in the ocean. I think we might have a great video of that. But that's the cool thing about doing science is that just from observing, different animals, you can notice what makes them unique and what makes them special. So as Sarah works on kind of finding an image of maybe a ray that has a different way of feeding, I would like you all to think about, is there any other ray questions that you might have? Please feel free to text or email us. Oh, this is a really great video. Okay, so this is a different kind of ray that we're observing, but I want you to pay attention to the mouth of this ray. Well, just as I said that, it turns its back to us, but that's okay. Something that I notice is that this ray is not laying on the seafloor. Do you notice that? This one is actually swimming in the water. It makes me wonder, maybe it's not eating things that are on the ground. Okay, we can see its mouth, and it looks really strange, right? It kind of has what looks like these little flaps, right, that are hanging out in front of its mouth. This is an example of a manta ray. And manta rays, they are planktivores. And I know that might be kind of a fancy word, but it has that word plankton in it, right, the little front part. And then maybe you recognize the vor from carnivore or herbivore. So if an animal is a planktivore, that means it eats plankton, right, or things that are floating around in the water. And they are filter feeders. So actually they have this really kind of cool structure in their mouth that helps them collect tiny little bits that are floating in the water. So a manta ray really wouldn't have a jaw like the one that I just showed you, right? Instead, they kind of funnel water into their mouth and they collect all of the bits out of it. So even within rays, there's lots of diversity in terms of what their favorite food is. So it just depends on which ray you're asking about. And so it is really cool that we can see that they have different diets, and what an animal's diet is affects where it's live, or vice versa, right? So this one is a little bit more free swimming. It'll be kind of moving through the ocean because that's where it's going to find its food, right? So a manta ray is not really going to rest on the bottom. Let's see, someone asked a question, do they ever choke on small pieces of shell? That's a great question. I think maybe not, right? Because if you ever observe a ray eat, they kind of are like a little vacuum, but they will spit out the shell. So they'll kind of suck up the water. They'll kind of get the actual good parts out. And you'll see them, they kind of spit out some of those fragments, and that's why they're left all on the seafloor. I'm sure maybe at some point in time, a ray has maybe gotten a little bit stuck in its throat, but I think for the most part they are pretty good. And actually, rays have taste buds, so they know what is their food. They can taste specifically what they're looking for. So that's a great question. Um, Definitely something that could be probably more studied, but I think for the most part they're pretty good at tasting the specific food that they want, and they can kind of isolate those pieces and spit out the rest. What a great question. And then I guess a manta ray really wouldn't choke on too much because their food is really tiny. So this is a really cool example of a ray. I also would like us to take a look at all of the different body shapes of ray. So a manta is kind of a diamond shape, right? Whereas other rays might be slightly different. So I wonder if we have a photo of a different kind of ray. This one is one of my favorites, and we have this here at the Aquarium of the Pacific. Right? What do you notice when you look at this ray's body? So I'm noticing a lot of these electric blue spots. Well, that is basically its name. It's a blue spotted ribbon-tail ray, right? And different rays will have different coloration. Most of the time, you'll see that rays are darker on the top of their body and lighter on the bottom, right? And I want us to take a moment to think about that because it is a really special adaptation. It actually has a name called counter shading. So, if a ray is swimming, the top of it is going to be darker because, say, if you were a predator hanging out above the ray and you looked down, right, it would blend in a little bit better with the darker seafloor, right? And then having that really pale underside helps because, say, if you are a predator but you're underneath the ray and you're looking up at it, you're also looking up towards where the light is shining down, right? So the bottom of the ray is usually very light, almost white, and that helps it kind of blend in with the brighter surface of the water, and that's called counter shading. We can see that in most species of stingrays. And then we also see different patterns and coloration. So this one in particular has those bright blue spots. You might have heard that lots of animals, even ones on land, they will have these bright colors, right, kind of as a warning, right? A lot of things that are brightly colored can be poisonous or venomous, right? And that might be what this specific ray is trying to do, right? Is trying to say, hey, stay away from me. I am dangerous. I have all these bright, fancy colors. You don't actually want to come and pick on me. And another cool thing is the body shape of this ray, right? So this one is more of a circle. And actually, this ribbon-tail ray, even in this picture, you can see that it looks kind of like its body is making a wave, right? And it tends to be that if you see a ray that is a little bit more round, it's going to be moving in kind of an undulating or a wave motion, right? So it kind of ripples its fin, and that helps it move through the water. Rays that are a little bit more diamond shaped, right, they're going to do a little bit more of a flapping motion with their fin. So actually, we have a little bit of time together still. I would love for us to draw some rays together so we can kind of see all these different shapes. So I'm going to head back to my document camera and let's draw some rays. We learned a lot about them. All right, we don't need those anymore. So I think we can draw a round one and we can draw a diamond shaped one. So we can kind of show just a little bit of that diversity. So we talked about the ray's body shape. So I'm going to give this ray, let's see, kind of a oval or egg-shaped body. And let me go ahead and give it a nice long tail. And actually, rays do have, this is their pectoral fin. So I'm just going to show you, if you were to take an x-ray of a stingray, you would see like all of these tiny little bones inside this area because this is where its fins are. So if you could see into its skeleton, you would see those little cartilaginous um, kind of, well, what would I call it? I'm going to call it bones because they're not made of bone, but that's the best word to describe them. So they have all this cartilage in there that gives their fins a little bit of structure. And then I'm going to give my ray a little eye. So let's see. Its eyes are on the top of its head. And even the location, let me redo this eye. Even the location of a ray's eye tells us a lot about how this animal lives, right? Because if its eyes are on the top of its head, it's going to be able to see anything that is above it, right? And so this is a ray that we can expect will mostly stay on the seafloor. and it only has to worry about looking up. Let's see, I'm going to give it just some little lines so I can imagine where the middle of it is. And actually, rays have a special adaptation for breathing. If we look back at our blue spotted ribbontail picture, we can actually see those really well. Right, so think about how fish breathe. Right, do you know what a fish uses to breathe? Right, they use gills. But when I'm looking at this picture of a ray, I don't really see any gills. Right, and that is because they have them, but they're hidden. Right, so the gill slits would be on the underside of the ray's body, whereas on top, you actually can see something special, and it's these little pits, right, or it looks like a little hole behind its eye, and those are called spiracles. I always say that one wrong. So a spiracle is essentially a little opening, kind of like a vent, and it allows water in, and then the ray pushes the water over its gills and collects the dissolved oxygen that is in the water. Right? It's oxygen that we can't see, but we know that it's there. And so those little spiracles are really important because a ray can stay resting on the bottom and it can still take in water. Right? So, for example, if you ever slept on your face, which sometimes I do, you might notice that it is hard to breathe if your face is down in your pillow. Wouldn't it be helpful if your nose was on the back of your head? Then you could sleep face down all the time. That's basically what a ray does, right? It has its openings on the top of its head so it can still take in water without actually having to swim up. So we'll go back to my drawing and give it some spiracles. And then we got another great question, so I'm going to go ahead and answer that in just a moment. So let's give my ray some spiracles so that it can take in water. Right, and if you were to look at the underside of this ray, I'm just going to draw it really quickly, you would be able to see some little gill slits. So they're there, even if you can't see them. All right, so someone asked, can rays go on land? Rays are marine animals, so they do need to stay in the water. And actually, it's a great timing because they can only breathe dissolved oxygen that's in the water, right? And so those spiracles open and close so that liquid water can go inside. So a ray would not be able to go on land. But that is a really good question, right? It would need a different way of breathing, maybe something more similar to us, right? Like lungs, because on land, the oxygen is in the air. It's not in the water, and they're just not adapted to breathe oxygen that's in the air. What a great question. Okay, so to finish off my ray, I'm going to go ahead and give it some pattern. I think I'm going to do mine just like the blue spotted ribbontail ray. I'm going to give it some warning blue spots, but you can do this in any color you'd like. But this way, if there's a predator coming by, they know not to mess with my ray. That looks really cool. And actually, I'm going to add to my drawing of the underside. If you were able to see its mouth, it would be about right here. So that is what the ray would use to suck up its food and crush some of those hard animals. Excellent. So hopefully you finished decorating your ray. I'm going to go ahead and draw some sand in the background. Maybe I'll draw a little crab over here so that it's got a snack. So this ray is about to vacuum up that crab. Go ahead and add any decorations that you want. I'm going to add some shells as well. And maybe I'm going to add some crushed up pieces of shell because this ray has already gotten to some shelled animals. I love how many questions we're getting. Thank you so much. And something that we would really appreciate is if you are watching as a group, maybe you're watching in a classroom or with some of your friends or family, we would love if you texted or emailed us how many people you're watching with. That helps us know what our impact is. And we want to know how many people are celebrating Shark and Ray Awareness Day with us. Hopefully it's a nice big party. So please do text or email us if you're watching with a group. We'd love to hear who you're watching with and how many people you're celebrating alongside. All right, so go ahead and finish up your drawing, right? Add any kind of details or extra things in the background to really flesh out your picture. And if you have any last questions, right now is a great time to text or email us, because once the live stream ends, we won't be answering them live, but you can still ask us afterwards. Awesome. Well, as we come to the very end of our program, I think we can hop back to our Shark Lagoon. And I just want to say thank you all so much for learning about rays with me today. They are some of the coolest animals in the ocean. I think they just look very alien, but as you learn about their bodies and about how they survive, it all really makes sense, right? They have these really cool adaptations so that they can um, do exactly what it is they do, and they do it really well. And so I hope you enjoyed learning about sharks and rays today. And although today is Shark and Ray Awareness Day, every single day here at the Aquarium, we try to learn about the ocean and spread awareness about the incredible animals that live in it. So thank you for being a part of that today. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye.